Thank you for coming, my elite audience. I must say I'm rather new to these surroundings. I'm used to address a scientific audience, so I'm trying to switch gear, and if I'm not fully successful, just notify me and jump in. What I want to convey to you this afternoon is a balanced story on the benefits and the risk of ultraviolet. You heard all about the good things naturally in an environment like this, but I also want to give you some on the risk, but on a realistic base, so that you know how to deal with criticism on the risky side of the ultraviolet. Because as I will show you, I think you can actually be beneficial to your clients in educating them on UV. I think you have a special opportunity there to addressing clients interested in sunbed use and UV, educating them on the good and the bad of ultraviolet. So without much further ado, let me start by history. Several of my colleagues showed you pictures like this. We have an inclination to like the sun. I think there is an inborn intuitive feeling that the sun is good for us. And of course, life is based on sun. Without sun, there wouldn't be life on Earth. So there is a definite benefit to sunlight altogether. But as I'll show you, there are also some downtimes. But this notion of the sun being good to us has of course worked out in sun worship already in ancient times, like in Egypt and probably before that. But even nowadays we feel sympathetic towards the sun, and we like to sit in the sun. So there is a strong bonding to the sun. But looking at the sun scientifically, it is a nasty star. It emits all kinds of nasty particles, ionizing radiation. Fortunately, Mother Earth protects us from all the nasty things that the sun emits towards us. Mother Earth really nourishes us and protects us from the danger. Now, if on a rainy day we go stand with our backs to the sun, we can see a rainbow. And we all know that the rainbow gives us an overview of the colors that make up white light. And we know that we don't see all the wavelengths. To the red there is infrared, and to the purple there is ultraviolet. And the ultraviolet also comes in different flavors or colors. We have UVA, UVB, UVC. But most of the energy is in the visible and the infrared. If we enjoy the warmth of the sun, it's the visible and the infrared we feel. We have no sense for the ultraviolet. We don't have a notion that whether it's there or not. And fortunately, the atmosphere, especially the ozone layer, takes out the most harmful UV. The UVC and UVB partially is shielded. And if you look from space, you can depict it like this. Because there is oxygen in our atmosphere, ozone is formed, and ozone protects us from the most harmful ultraviolet from the sun. And it's quite easy to see that UV is harmful in the laboratory. If you, in a petri dish, do a bacteria culture or yeast culture, and you irradiate half of the culture, you can kill it. So ultraviolet can be used to sanitize, to clean up areas from bacteria if you use the UVC. And that was already known at early previous century. And they even found out by analyzing the wavelength dependence that it's not proteins that are harmed for the killing of bacteria, but it's the DNA. DNA is the primary target of UV in killing and mutating cells. So that's the downside of ultraviolet. But if you look at laboratory experiments with simulated sunlight, you also see that plants react to ultraviolet. Here you see a little experiment under simulated solar light, and you see as you allow more shortwave length into your simulated sunlight, where's my dash here, here only UVA, but if you allow UVB, you see a little delay in the growth of the seedlings, and if you allow UVC, you see an even larger delay of growth. So plants also notice whether there's UV or not. Now, in evolution, our atmosphere didn't always contain oxygen. And ozone thereby was only introduced some 2.5 billion years ago, if we may believe the geologists. And by the introduction of ozone, the harmfulness of ultraviolet went down by 3 orders of magnitude. As soon as the atmosphere closed up by ozone, the UVC got blocked, UVB got blocked, and all the killing effects got 1,000 times less. And some 2 billion years later, land masses were colonized. So everything in evolution seemed to went down in logical order. Now, if you look at us, we enjoy the sun, and apparently we can do so without doing much harm to our skin. Evidently, our skin is very well adapted to the ultraviolet. I showed you that UV in principle is capable of harming our DNA, but we have a very, very powerful repair system in our skin which takes care of the damage, most of the damage. It's not foolproof, but it's highly, highly efficient. So we are adapted to the sun. That's evident. Nevertheless, there are beneficial sides, which we know, of course. First of all, people like to tan. That's why we're here. That's a cosmetic effect, but there are also genuine health effects from ultraviolet. Most prominently, of course, the formation of vitamin D. But there are other beneficial effects also listed here. But then we also have to consider the downside of ultraviolet, and that's usually a consequence of excessive exposure. So here's already the message: don't expose excessively. And most of all, of course, there's worry about skin cancer. So if we consider the sun, we have a sad face, but we also have a smiley on the beneficial side. So the question is, how do we enlarge the smiling face and keep the sad face to a minimum? Now, here you see how we behaved over the last century. We started off very modestly and ended up abundantly exposing ourselves to the sun. And this behavior probably led to a dramatic increase in skin cancer over the last century. Especially melanoma already increased early last century. Long before sunbeds were introduced, melanoma were already on the rise. So don't be fooled that sunbeds would be triggering the increase. It was there long before we had the sunbeds market taking well off in the 70s or 80s, what was it? And the most evident risk factor for melanoma is sunburn. Excessive exposure leading to sunburn is simply a very high-profile risk factor for melanoma. So the message seems to be quite simple here: avoid sunburn. And you can tan very well without burning. A professional suntanner should be aware of that and convey the message to his clients that you can do a perfect job on suntanning without burning. If you consider burning, if you do a telephone survey and ask 1,000 people, have you burned over the last 12 months? Over 30% will respond by saying, yes, we have sunburned. So sunburn is very common in the public out there. It's not an odd event at all. It's far too common still. People still burn, burn, and burn. They don't need sunbeds for that. And if you look at the sunbed from a physical point of view, physicist point of view, the wavelengths emitted, the spectrum, are in the same range of sunlight. So by all, if considering this, the range of effects can be expected to be the same as in sunlight. And in fact, there is no scientific proof that a sunbed would evoke other responses than the sun does. So for all intents and purposes, sunbeds equals sun. And the sun spectrum, we have to note that, is not a single entity. The sun spectrum varies widely over the day and over the season. So there is no such thing as the sun spectrum. It's highly variable. Now if we look at sunbathing, it's not emphasized in literature, in scientific literature, but as people using a sunbed are highly likely to also sunbathe. There are not too many publications, but the odds that a sunbed user is also a very fanatic sunbather, the data is out there. So it's for a scientist, it's very difficult to disentangle the effects of sunbeds from sunbathing. It's hardly doable. And it stands to reason that if you ask, consider a person, where do you get your highest doses from? Is it from sunbeds or is it from sun? That in most cases it will still be the sun that is dictating the UV dose people get. Now if you consider a sunbed operator, I think if you're very aware of the doses you give your clients and that you minimize the doses you need for a tanning or other effects, that you can consider that you can lower the rate so that photoaging of your clients will be minimized, and you can lower the rate so that the risk of skin carcinoma of any other cancer can be minimized. You are in a better position to do that than your client outdoors, in fact. You control doses, a client outdoor doesn't. So you as a professional can assess what kind of doses your client needs to stay away from excessive exposures. Somebody living indoors, an office worker, evidently can handle more doses than people already excessively exposing themselves. So if we now take a closer look at melanoma, which is the most risky skin cancer there is, of course, and you as a sunbed user are probably continuously confronted with the risk of melanoma, because studies would have shown that people on sunbeds are in that risk. I think you have to reconsider that risk assessment. If you look at older studies on the risk of melanoma from sunlight, it's childhood exposure that is definitely a risk factor. And it's, where's my little pointer? And it's especially severe sunburns that constitute a risk factor for melanoma. And just to educate you a bit, a pigment cell, a melanocyte, is usually not dividing in an adult skin. There are only 2 periods in which pigment cells divide. That's as a child, as your skin expands, there have to be more and more pigment cells, so the cell divides to accommodate an expanding skin. And with sunburns, also other trauma, the pigment cells can be stimulated to divide, like with sunburns. And a cancer really needs dividing cells to start up. If you have DNA damage entering replication for cell division, that's a very critical event, because the DNA has to be copied, and if you copy damaged DNAs, things can go wrong. Mutations can be introduced. So you wouldn't like the melanocytes to divide while you're irradiating. So you don't want to irradiate a child excessively, and you don't want to irradiate up to the point that a severe sunburn sets in. You don't want that. And you don't need that for good tanning. So if you look at science looking at sunbeds, for some odd reason, they have never asked the right questions relating to risk for sunbeds. It's how frequently do you use the sunbed, how long have you used it, at what age have you used it, but never the question, hardly ever the question, did you burn on the sunbed, which is the real risk factor for melanoma. Very strange. Now, if there are few studies who actually did pose the question, I could only dig up 2. And if you look at those studies, a recent one and an older one, you find dramatic increases also on sunbeds if people burn on the sunbeds. So in fact, the risk on a sunbed is no different from the sun. If you burn, you increase your risk for melanoma. So the conclusion is melanoma risk, either from sunbed or sun, hinges on sunburns. So the message is simple. If you want to hold down the risk for melanoma, avoid sunburns. And you can perfectly well tan without sunburns. So if you are a professional, you tan your clients without burning them. Now there are masses of studies on the risk of sunbeds related to melanoma, but none of them pose the right question. So in this question, did you ever or never use a sunbed? In fact, what you find is a marginal increase of risk, around 20% of an already small risk, which is not that dramatic to a person. But the strange thing is they never asked the million-dollar question, did you burn on the sunbed? And that's the real question. So all these studies never posed the million-dollar question, which leaves you with the question, how informative are these studies on sunbed use? In fact, they are not informative, but because they do not address the real risk factor, which is both there in sun exposure and which is there as sunbed exposure. But I put it to you, you can control the doses on sunbeds, so you can control the risk of your clients for melanoma. And also notice that the question addressed here is, did you ever or never use a sunburn? Now it's strange that this question is perverted in some anti-sunbed campaigns. It seems to be a witch hunt on sunbeds, which is beyond rationale and logic. An example I show you here. This is from a website in which two girls who got melanoma talk about their past, but especially blame the sunbed use, which is very strange. If you look at the first girl, she was 13 when she started with sunbed, but she used it to adapt for a holiday in Hawaii. Then you ask the question, now, what was the risk factor? The sunbed or the extensive exposure in Hawaii? I bet it was Hawaii. My bet would be on Hawaii. If you look at the second girl, she started from 6th grade. And after she went to a sun parlor, she got a sunbed from the family and started using that 4 times a week excessively, till she got a melanoma at the age of 17. Now, that's already excessive use of the sunbed, and you wonder whether she also enjoyed sunlight next to using the sunbed. So it's very difficult to disentangle here the risk of actual sunbed use and sun exposure. But notice that in both headings, it says, for instance here, use the tanning bed only once and your risk goes up. There is no scientific study which ever addressed the question of using a sunbed once, did it increase your risk? No, the question was, did you ever use a sunbed or did you never use a sunbed, which is completely different from using it once. So somehow campaigns against sunbed use are perverted and twisted. I don't know why, but it seems like there is a witch hunt on sunbeds, which is beyond logic. Now, a dramatic case was, of course, in Australia, the unfortunate Claire Oliver, who got melanoma when she was young. And in the media, she told about her Solaria use. But in fact, she only used a solarium, she says, 10 times. She used the solarium 10 times and keeps on referring to her melanoma in relation to the sunbed use. But she also states that she strived after having a tan all her life. She went outdoors sunbathing. So it's very unreasonable to blame 10 times solar use for her melanoma. It stands to reason that the main risk event was her lifelong exposure at the beach and everywhere she wanted to get a tan. So again, perverted news. Strangely enough, this was picked up and led to banning commercial tanning units in Australia. Very strange course of events. If you consider banning commercial tanning youths from Australia, Australia with all her abundant sunlight, it makes no reason. It's like banning alcohol to avoid alcohol use. Ban alcohol from restaurants and bars, but leave it freely available from liquor stores. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. It's scientifically ill-founded, and it's a misguided, futile policy, in my opinion. So I put it to you, professional operators, no longer be a part of the melanoma problem, but be part of the solution to the problem. Behave yourself as professional, consciously of what your client needs and wants. So become your client's UV dietitian. Beware, make him aware, beware of the UV calories they get and you serve. Rationalize their UV diets so that they are served optimally and not in a nonsensical way. So no longer outdoor eating till you can't eat anymore, but beware of the portions you get and sell the message that the in-house sun tanning, you can do that cut to your client. You can serve him a tasty and effective ration of UV to serve him in the needs that he has, tanning or otherwise. So professional tanning users, I would say, tell your clients to not go outdoors for uncontrolled sunbathing, but come into your studios for controlled tanning, and discourage the uncontrolled sun tanning. So take charge in your sun parlor. You dictate what the exposure time is, judged by the skin reactions of your clients. You control what they get. You don't leave it up to your clients. Be professional and make a professional stance. Do your industry a service and lower the risk of anything associated to UV. So after the bad message, you heard a lot about the good news on UV, and I want to convey two little experiments we did, which in fact confirm the beneficial effects of ultraviolet. First of all, not many people are aware that the UV our skin gets also serves the skin to adapt to UV. If we would avoid sunlight altogether, many of us would develop this kind of rash. It's called sun allergy. It's a consequence of seeing UV for a long time, don't see any UV for a long time, and then all of a sudden get exposed. Then some people break out in a rash. They know it. Most of them know that if they gradually build up the sun doses, the allergy will be gone after a few days. So to most it's not a big problem, but to some it's a lasting problem. And the recipe for sun allergy is gradual adaptation to UV, which you can also do in a sun studio. But you need UVB to get a good adaptation. And what a normal person does, he modulates his immune reactions to avoid the allergy. Most of us are successful in down-modulating our immune system, thus that we won't develop an allergy. But in skin types, women of skin type 1, 30% are capable of getting a sun allergy. So it's quite a high number of people that are sensitive. Now, if you look at UVB, I won't go into the details, but UV modulates our immune responses. One of the things is that it downregulates cellular immunity with the consequence of less allergy. But it also has a downside. It may make you more vulnerable to infections. On the other hand, UV pushes up, boosts our innate immunity. Our skin produces proteins which directly kill bacteria and viruses. What UV does is increase that output. So our skin becomes more killing to bacteria, more killing to viruses on UV exposure. Now, if you look at this, the much praised, and you see that around you, vitamin D effect, the most eye-catching effect was, of course, on bone effects. It was well known that children developed all kinds of weird bone defects if they didn't see enough sunlight, and it turned out to be the sunlight vitamin D, which was responsible for that. So early previous century, children in winter got UV exposed to keep up their vitamin D levels and have them have healthy bones. Maybe we should get back to winter exposures. The much praised effect of UV, of course, is all sorts of effects, but also on colon cancer. But it's in epidemiology and sciences, it was all association. A high level of vitamin D was associated with a lower effect, with a lower risk of colon cancer. But nobody could tell you whether there was a causal relation or that it was an accidental association. So we decided to do the experiment in mice. So we irradiated mice that are prone to develop intestinal cancers. And indeed, we found that with UV, you slow down and you impair the development of intestinal cancer. And what we also saw is that UV was capable of impairing the progression to malignancy. So there were several beneficial effects from irradiating the animal on the development of his intestinal tumor. So there was a simple mouse experiments which showed you that there is causality between irradiating the skin and impairing the development of cancers in your gut. Now we have, in Leiden, we have a special group of patients which are renal transplant patients. So they got a kidney transplanted, and that can be done nowadays very successfully. And those people are monitored. For one of the things they look at is their vitamin D levels in the course of their life. And these people live long enough to naturally develop cancers of all sorts. So we decided to look at their vitamin D levels before they got the cancer. Now, if you look at the people that didn't have the cancer, that's the blue line, their vitamin D levels varied over the year, over the months, as you would expect. Now, if you look at the people that did develop an internal cancer, you see the red line, and you see there's not much different. Where's my little pointer? I lost my... There's not much difference in summer. Summer levels are not significantly different, but there is a significant difference in winter. The people that developed cancer tended to have lower midwinter levels of vitamin D. So if there's any risk associated with vitamin D low levels, it's especially wintertime. And having high levels in summer doesn't make a whole lot of difference, at least not in this patient group. So the message here is take care that your wintertime levels in vitamin D don't go too low. And the best way of doing that, of course, so the low winter levels in vitamin D are associated with cancer in our patient group. So the question is, how do we avoid low winter levels? Well, if you look at these data, upping your summer levels is not very efficient. The way of addressing a winter low is addressing it when it's winter. So you take, to a Dutchman, you would eat a lot of fish, fat fish, which contain vitamin D. Or you would simply take the pills, or maybe we should take a little ultraviolets, which is efficiently increasing our vitamin D levels. Also, the current lamps out there are very, very capable of upping our vitamin D levels, especially in wintertime, noticeably and dramatically. And you don't need a whole lot of UV. You definitely don't need to be sun exposed to sunburns, but it can be very, very, very low to keep up a good level of vitamin D. So I put it to you as a wellness professional. First of all, consider whether your client really needs UV. If it's the relaxation he's after, it's just warmth, offer him an infrared sauna. If it's vitalization, maybe he needs good light to his eyes to synchronize his day-night rhythm. But if he really is after UV, for instance, for tanning, be aware of which lamps you really need. If for a tan, you need a lamp emitting both UVB and UVA. If it's skin adaptation, you especially need a lamp that emits UVB. If it's vitamin D you're after, again, it's UVB you need. If it's blood pressure effects mediated through nitrogen oxide, it's UVA mainly. So as a professional, know your equipment and be aware of the doses you are dishing out to your clients. So I put it to you, put up this message in your sun parlor. Don't get sunburned, get sun-kissed. And those are the people I work with, and it's the message I would like to convey to you.